One of President Trump's most senior advisors has expressed his hope for a zero-tariff situation between the US and the European Union as the impact of Donald Trump's swift and wide-ranging tariffs start to take effect, speaking via video link at a political gathering in Italy. Elon Musk said he could see a future where there was a free trade zone between the two economies. As it stands, the EU will have to pay a 20% levy on all imports into the US world. Leaders have continued to react to the new economic order, with the British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer and the French President Emmanuel Macron promising to coordinate their positions on any retaliatory action. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of people have marched in dozens of US cities in protest against Donald Trump and his policies since his return to the White House. Well, I'm joined now by Peter Draper, the Executive Director for the Institute for International Trade at Adelaide University. Peter, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News Australia. Itself has been hit with baseline tariffs of 10%. The Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said the nation wouldn't introduce its own tariffs in return. So what do you make of the position that Australia finds itself in? Now, I think it's the correct decision that the Prime Minister has taken. Imposing our own tariffs would amount to self-harm, and that's the basic position the government has taken. And retaliating against the United States would invite further retaliations, and trying to cut some sort of special deal would be a deal with an administration that essentially can't be trusted. So there's really no good options here. And what the government is doing is to double down on its diversifications, strategies which have been in place for some time, whilst at the same time putting in place policies to build economic and trade resilience. So I think a pretty comprehensive response, and quite a defensible one, because Australia quite often has to navigate between its ally, the US, and the regional power of China. So how are they going to strike the balance best for the country of Australia? Yeah, that's always a balancing act. And one should recall that a couple of years ago, China also coerced Australia, and at that time, about 40% of our exports went to China. To put that into perspective, about 5% of our exports go to the United States. So we're far less exposed to the US market, and we can't therefore, outside of a few sector and product stories, particularly beef exports to the US, we can take the hit, relatively speaking. In the case of China, when they coerced us, we opted again to just double down and take the hit and diversify. And that's what most commodity exporters particularly were able to do. But the bottom line, I think, on the foreign policy front is that this Trump initiative draws the region, generally speaking, closer to China. This is a golden opportunity for China to cement its regional relationships and displace the United States in the region. And what of the relationship between Australia and the United States? The two countries have been allies for years. How concerned are you about the relationship as we move forward? Very concerned, I would say. So yes, we're a key US security ally in the region. We're not the only one. Of course, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, all are equally concerned, and reading the Washington tea leaves with growing alarm, and particularly the growing influence of the mega right in US foreign policy, within which the isolationist trend, I think, is increasingly evident. And what would that mean for Australia's security settings going forward? Well, there's a very famous Australian book that I'm rereading at the moment called Fear of Abandonment, and I think that is moving very much to the fore. We are very exposed and very concerned about it. Peter, thank you very much. Fear of Abandonment. I will look that up. That's Peter Draper, the Executive Director for the Institute of International Trade at Adelaide University. President Trump's tariffs will affect many countries, including Scotland, which has a long history of exporting products like whiskey and salmon. But will American consumers continue to buy such luxuries after the prices go up? Our reporter, David Wallace Lockhart, has been speaking to people in New York to find out. New York City is a few hours from Washington, D.C., But the shock waves of Trump's tariff announcement have been felt here, and the day that we begin to make America wealthy, again reciprocal. That means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple. Can't get any simpler than that at the Colonia Bar. The 130 Scottish Weisses they stock are likely to increase in cost. Jeff Winslow, originally from Greenock, thinks they may have to pivot towards US-produced spirits. We will have to increase our prices, there's no question about that. And then, but if we don't move through the bottles, then we may just have to increase our American product. American, we say, product rise, bourbon set, and then hopefully the Scotch doesn't become obsolete or extinct. The USA is a really important market. For Scotland, of course it is. It's the biggest economy in the world. But a key question is, will tariffs change the behavior of the consumers who live here? It's not just whiskey that faces challenges. Stephen Wong, a fish wholesaler on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, sells a ton of Scottish salmon a week too. Michelin-starred restaurants' costs may go up, but he'll stick with the product. We don't produce it, or we don't aquaculture in the United States. And a lot of these items are probably, throughout the last 30, 40 years have been from another country. We rely on a lot of wild seafood in our cuisine. But for farm stuff, salmon, not quite so much. But I understand his logic. But if there are certain things that we produce, I don't mind. But these are certain things that we just don't produce, wherever you move in. New York, you don't have to look far to bear reminded of Donald Trump and his impact Scottish business figures. Want to say you're fired to his tariffs. Tariffs are always unhelpful when it comes to doing business. But where tariffs are being applied, we want them reduced and ultimately removed. But if they are to remain in place, then it's our job as chambers of commerce and business to steer our economy. Through these side challenges, the Big Apple is already a city of big prices. Scottish produce could be about to get even more expensive, a nerve-wracking time for those who want to crack this market. David Wallace, Lockhart News, New York.